The hangar reeked of engine oil, steel, and rain-soaked concrete. Floodlights carved harsh shadows over rows of sailors standing at attention, the metallic echo of boots fading into uneasy silence. The air carried the faint hum of distant rotors, but all eyes were fixed on one man, a figure standing apart, hands folded behind his back, posture calm yet unreadable. He wasn't in uniform. His jacket was worn, the color faded by years of weather and war. His eyes, a gray that seemed to carry storms, surveyed the Navy base with detached stillness. He had once belonged here. Now he was an outsider standing before those who'd forgotten his name. Admiral Keaton, tall and sharp as the brass on his chest, paced slowly before the line of officers. His tone cut through the air with polished arrogance. "You must be the volunteer contractor we were told about," he said without looking directly at the veteran. "What did they call you again?" The man's silence was steady, respectful. He didn't blink. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a test he'd already passed long ago. Keaton smirked, tapping a pen against his clipboard. "Right, I forgot. Every one of you operators had some dramatic nickname. What was yours? Ghost something? Or maybe just another campfire myth?" A few younger officers chuckled softly. The sound echoed like pebbles skipping across still water, harmless yet deeply insulting. The veteran's jaw tensed, but his voice remained low. "Just here to help with the rescue op, sir." The Admiral looked up for the first time, eyes narrowing. "We don't need legends here, son. We need discipline." For a moment, the room fell into an almost sacred silence, the kind born when someone unknowingly walks on hallowed ground. The veteran's name wasn't spoken, but it lingered in the air like smoke. The Admiral didn't realize who stood before him, nor the weight behind the name he had mocked. Outside, the rain thickened, drumming softly against the hangar roof. The veteran's thoughts drifted, not to the insult, but to his daughter waiting at home. 7 years old, she had drawn a picture that morning, a man in a Navy cap holding her hand beside a sunrise. She'd written, "My hero, Daddy." That simple memory steadied him more than any weapon ever had. But fate had a cruel way of circling back. The mission briefing began, and as satellite images appeared on the wall, tension cut through the air. A cargo ship had gone dark in the Gulf, carrying classified ordnance. Hostile forces were suspected. The SEAL teams were thin, and time was running out. Keaton's voice filled the room again. "We'll need someone to lead the extraction on site. Volunteers will rotate under my supervision. No one goes without clearance." Before anyone could speak, an older commander stepped forward. "Sir, we've already received DoD confirmation. The civilian attached to this OP has full clearance." He hesitated. "He's former SEAL Team 7. Call sign Iron Ghost." The words fell like thunder. The Admiral froze mid-step, his expression faltering for the first time in his career. The laughter died instantly. Every gaze turned to the quiet man at the edge of the room. He hadn't moved. His calm was unshaken, his silence heavier than any rank. Iron Ghost, a name whispered among special operations as a myth, a phantom of the battlefield, the operator who led missions deep behind enemy lines, never seen, never caught. The man who had vanished after saving an entire platoon when extraction failed in Kandahar. Keaton swallowed hard. He remembered the reports, the impossible rescue, the body count, the medal that never reached its owner because the man had disappeared before the ceremony. Now he stood here, alive, unassuming, and wearing the face of a single father who carried groceries and packed school lunches. The Admiral tried to recover, forcing a brittle smile. "Well," he muttered, "seems the legends are real after all." Iron Ghost simply met his eyes. "Legends fade," he said quietly, "but promises don't." Keaton said nothing. For the first time, authority felt hollow in his throat. As the rain beat harder outside, the Admiral turned back to the briefing screen. But his voice trembled when he spoke. The room no longer belonged to him. The command presence had shifted. Without raising his voice, without demanding respect, the man known as Iron Ghost had already taken control. And deep within him, behind the calm exterior, an old ache stirred, the weight of a promise left unfinished, one that tonight's mission might finally allow him to keep. The night had a pulse, thick, rhythmic, and alive with distant thunder. The tarmac glistened under the floodlights as the strike team prepared for departure. Engines growled, rotors spun, and shadows moved like ghosts between aircraft. The operation was set in motion, but every heartbeat carried a strange unease. Iron Ghost, the man once written off as a legend, stood apart from the others, checking his gear with silent precision. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, as if the years of civilian quiet had merely been camouflage for the soldier beneath. The patch of his daughter's drawing, laminated and taped inside his pack, was the only color among the grays of steel and gunmetal. Across the airfield, Admiral Keaton watched him through the rain. The earlier arrogance had drained away, replaced by something heavier, the sharp sting of regret. He had mocked a man whose legacy had once defined courage itself. Now he saw what command reports never captured: the quiet weight that haunted heroes who came home. 5 minutes to lift, a voice called through the comms. The team assembled near the aircraft, adrenaline humming in their veins. As Iron Ghost approached, the younger SEAL straightened instinctively. Respect wasn't commanded. It emanated from him like gravity. They had heard his story, how he'd carried 2 wounded men for 7 miles under enemy fire, how he vanished after refusing to leave a fallen comrade behind. Some called it myth. Now, standing in his presence, it didn't feel like one. Inside the aircraft, the roar of the rotors blurred into a steady rhythm. The night swallowed them as the helicopter lifted, the coastline shrinking beneath. Ghost's mind, however, was far away. Not in the mission brief, but in a small home with soft yellow lights, where his daughter slept with his old dog curled at her feet. He'd promised her he'd be back before morning. He always kept his word. The pilot's voice cut through the static. "We're closing in on the vessel." No radio response. Thermals picking up multiple heat signatures. Could be hostiles. Iron Ghost opened his eyes fully, the soldier awakening inside him. The softness vanished, replaced by the cold precision of a man who'd lived too long in the dark. He checked his weapon, nodded once, and signaled to his team. As they descended onto the ship, wind tore through the night. The deck was slick, scattered with abandoned crates and silent machinery. The air smelled of salt and rust, and something else metallic and wrong. One of the SEAL whispered, "No movement topside." Iron Ghost didn't answer. His senses were already mapping the shadows, reading the silence like a language. He moved first, not with haste, but with the stillness of a predator who'd walked this path too many times before. Then came the noise, a faint clatter below deck, steel against steel. The team froze. Iron Ghost raised his hand, signaling formation. They advanced down the stairwell, boots echoing softly against the narrow corridor walls. What they found made every man in the unit stiffen. The ship's crew, bound, bruised, and terrified, lay huddled near the engine room. The youngest, barely 20, looked up and whispered. They planted charges. In the hold, Iron Ghost's gaze hardened. The bomb timer blinked faintly through the dim light. 4 minutes. No room for error. "Evacuate them," he said quietly. Now he knelt by the device, eyes scanning the wiring, the telltale pattern of professionals. Whoever set it knew what they were doing, and yet something in the setup felt familiar. The configuration, the type of trigger, even the material. A memory sliced through him like a blade. Kandahar years ago. The same setup, the same mark. His breath stilled. The man who planted this wasn't just an enemy. He was someone Ghost had once left behind. Up top, the storm grew violent, waves battering the vessel as evacuation began. The SEAL moved the crew to extraction, shouting through the roar of wind. But down below, Iron Ghost stayed motionless, his gloved hand hovering over the wire, his mind caught between duty and ghosts of the past. Keaton's voice cracked through the earpiece. "Status." Ghost didn't respond. His jaw clenched, eyes locked on the timer. 3 minutes left. He could almost hear the past whispering, the face of a friend turned enemy, the betrayal that had driven him into exile. He breathed out slowly. The world shrank to a single heartbeat. One wrong move, and the sea would swallow them all. But Iron Ghost had been born in chaos. He had walked through death and come back with silence as his ally. His hands moved with unbroken calm, tracing the circuit, finding the fault line. 2 minutes, one wire cut, then another, then nothing, then nothing. The blinking light went still. The timer froze at 01. The veteran exhaled softly, but his expression didn't change. He stood, wiping a smear of grease on his sleeve, and looked toward the exit ladder. The sound of distant thunder rolled again, but inside him, only silence. As he climbed back toward the deck, the Admiral's voice came again, lower, almost reverent. "Ghost, is it done?" He reached the top and looked across the storm-lit sea. "For now," he said. Lightning flashed, revealing the hard lines of his face. Not pride, not relief, but the quiet ache of someone who'd saved lives, yet couldn't save his own peace. And as the helicopter lifted them from the chaos, Keaton watched from the cabin, unable to speak. The man he'd mocked hours ago had just saved his entire operation. But Ghost wasn't thinking about medals, or headlines, or redemption. He was thinking of a little girl's drawing waiting on the kitchen table, and the promise of morning that he still intended to keep. The helicopter cut through the storm, slicing through sheets of rain that glittered under the dim cabin lights. The crew sat in silence, each man lost in the echo of what had just happened. For them, the mission was a success. A clean extraction, 0 casualties. But for Iron Ghost, it felt unfinished. The air around him was heavy, not with exhaustion, but with recognition. The wiring on that explosive wasn't random. It was personal. He leaned back against the cold metal wall of the aircraft, eyes unfocused. The rhythmic hum of the rotors blurred into the memory of another night. Long ago, Kandahar, smoke, dust, gunfire. The sound of a voice shouting his name through chaos. The man behind the voice, his friend, his brother in arms, had been presumed dead after Ghost made the impossible call to retreat. But the device on that ship told him the truth, that man was alive, and now he was sending a message. The helicopter landed at base before dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and fuel. Keaton stepped out first, his uniform soaked, his authority somehow dimmed. He watched as Ghost climbed down, quiet, self-contained. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the Admiral said softly, "You knew who said it, didn't you?" Ghost didn't look up. "I know the pattern," he murmured. "And the man who made it." Keaton hesitated. "He was one of ours." Ghost's gaze finally lifted, sharp as a blade. "He was mine." The Admiral's breath caught. There was a story here, one that no classified report had ever told. Later that morning, the debriefing room felt like a confession booth. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, reflecting off tired faces and untouched coffee. Ghost stood before the mission map, tracing his finger along the shipping lanes. "He's not finished," he said quietly. "This was a test run. The next target won't be cargo, it'll be people." Keaton leaned forward. "You're saying he's working alone?" "No," Ghost said. "He's building something bigger." His voice dropped. "He calls himself Revenant now. He believes we left him to die. He's making sure the world remembers his name the way it forgot mine." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "Then we'll stop him. Together." But Ghost didn't answer. He turned toward the window, watching the dawn creep over the tarmac. He'd spent years avoiding the call of the uniform, hiding behind fatherhood and small-town quiet. But the past had found him anyway. Hours later, Ghost drove home through the mist, his truck rumbling softly over the coastal road. The sun rose behind the clouds, turning the sea into molten silver. In the rearview mirror, he saw a tired face, older, weathered, marked by the ghosts of battles long over. But when he pulled into the driveway, everything softened. Through the front window, he saw her, his daughter, running toward the door, her little backpack bouncing, her smile as wide as morning itself. She flung herself into his arms with the unshakable trust only a child could give. "Did you save people again, Daddy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his jacket. He hesitated, then nodded. "I tried." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Then you did." For a moment, the war inside him quieted. He made her breakfast, listened to her talk about school, laughed at her stories about her teacher's silly cat. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary morning. But beneath that gentle rhythm, something dark lingered, a feeling that peace was only borrowed time. When she left for school, he lingered at the window, watching her way from the bus. Then his phone buzzed. A secure message from Naval Intelligence. The sender code froze him. It wasn't from Keaton. It was from a ghost of another kind. The message contained no words, just a single image, the same kind of bomb schematic he had defused on the ship, marked with a date and a place. The coordinates pointed to a children's hospital near the docks. The time, 48 hours. Ghost's pulse slowed, not quickened. The silence inside him deepened. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. That chilling, calm soldiers carried before walking into hell. He called Keaton. "It's him," he said simply. The Admiral's voice on the other end trembled. "Revenant? Yes. He's sending a message to me. Not to the Navy. What does he want?" Ghost stared out at the ocean. "To finish what we started." 2 days later, the operation began in secret. The base buzzed with hidden urgency, every hallway lined with quiet fear. Ghost stood in the armory, fitting his gear one last time. He moved with the same stillness that unnerved even the bravest. Each strap, each magazine, each breath, deliberate. Before heading out, he opened his locker. Inside, folded neatly, was the drawing his daughter had made, now worn and crumpled from years of travel. He tucked it into his vest, close to his heart. Not as a charm, but as a promise. Outside, the Admiral approached him, raincoat flapping in the wind. "You don't have to do this alone," Keaton said. "We can send a full team." Ghost shook his head. "You'll lose more men if you try. He knows me, he'll expect me." Keaton stared at him for a long time, the mask of command slipping away. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "About what kind of man you are." Ghost's eyes softened for the first time. "You weren't wrong," he replied. "You just didn't see the scars." Then, without another word, he walked toward the waiting chopper, a lone figure disappearing into the wind. The Admiral watched him go, a flicker of realization dawning. The legend wasn't about the missions, or the medals, or the silence. It was about a man who kept showing up, even when the world had forgotten to thank him. As the helicopter lifted into the storm once again, Iron Ghost looked down at the city lights flickering like candles in the dark. Somewhere below, his enemy waited, a mirror of the man he once was. And for the first time in years, Ghost whispered to himself, not a prayer, not a curse, but a vow. "This ends tonight." The city slept under a bruised sky. Clouds hung low over the docks, and the water moved with a slow, uneasy pulse. Floodlights swept across shipping containers, their beams slicing through mist. Somewhere beneath that web of steel and rain waited the man-ghost once called brother, now turned shadow, now called revenant. The helicopter touched down a mile out. Ghost stepped onto the gravel, boots sinking into the damp earth. The air was thick with the scent of salt and oil, the kind of air that clung to memory. He moved without a word, slipping through the maze of cranes and metal corridors, guided by instinct rather than sight. The coordinates led to a derelict storage hangar near the waterfront. Its roof sagged like an old soldier's shoulders. Inside, dim lights flickered, illuminating the outline of old machinery, and at the center, the unmistakable shape of another bomb. But this one wasn't wired to detonate instantly. It was wired to announce. Ghost crouched, examining it. The timer wasn't running. The activation switch was remote, waiting. A trap meant to draw him close. Then a voice echoed softly through the shadows. "You were always predictable, Ghost." He turned slowly. Revenant stepped from the darkness, a silhouette carved from memory, older, hardened, his face half-marked by old burns. His eyes, once warm with brotherhood, now carried the same cold fire Ghost saw in mirrors. "I buried you in Kandahar," Ghost said quietly. Revenant's smile was thin, almost human. "You left me there." Big difference. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, alive with the ghosts of their past. "You think I wanted to?" Ghost asked. "You think I didn't go back?" Revenant shook his head, pacing slowly. "You went back when it was safe. After the gunfire, after the smoke. You didn't hear me scream while they dragged me away. You didn't see what they turned me into." Ghost studied him, the ache of guilt sharpening like a blade. "You survived. Revenant's laugh was low and hollow. Survived, no. I became their experiment, their tool. And when I finally escaped, I realized the truth. You got to be the hero, and I got to be the ghost. The words hit harder than any weapon. Ghost didn't flinch, but inside something fractured. He'd carried guilt for years, but now it had a face, a voice, a heartbeat. You want revenge. Ghost said, you want them to pay. I get that, but not this way. There are children in that hospital. Innocent people. Revenant's eyes flickered, the briefest trace of pain before fury drowned it. Innocence is a story we tell ourselves so we can sleep. No one's innocent in a world that builds men like us. He raised a small detonator. The red light blinked once in the dark. Ghost stepped forward slowly. You don't have to do this. You've already made your point. Revenant's hand trembled. Just slightly. You left me to die, brother. Now you'll watch the world remember my name. Ghost's voice softened, steady as the tide. You're right, I left you, I failed you. But I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped trying to make it right. For a heartbeat, silence returned. That sacred silence soldiers knew too well. The breath before the world breaks. Then Ghost spoke again. Lower this time. You can pull that trigger, or you can come home. The wind howled through the broken roof, scattering dust and rust across the floor. Revenant's finger hovered over the detonator. His eyes were wet, rage and sorrow twisted together. I can't go home, he whispered. Then let me bring you there, Ghost said. Lightning flashed, and in that brief blinding light both men moved. A struggle erupted, silent but brutal, two ghosts colliding in the dark. The detonator clattered to the ground, rolling across concrete. A single gunshot cracked, then another. When the echoes faded, Ghost stood over him, breathing hard blood on his shoulder, his weapon low. Revenant lay still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. For a long moment, Ghost said nothing. Then he knelt beside him, pressing a trembling hand against his chest. Rest now, he whispered. No more wars. Revenant's lips moved once, barely audible. You kept your promise. Then his breath left him, carried away by the wind that swept through the hangar. Ghost sat there in silence, the detonator lying harmless beside them. The storm outside eased, the rain softening to a whisper. By the time the Admiral's team arrived, it was over. The bomb was disarmed, the threat gone. They found Ghost sitting in the center of the hangar, motionless, his gaze fixed on nothing. Keaton approached carefully. It's done? Ghost nodded faintly. It's done. He stood slowly, his movements heavy, as though gravity had finally caught up to him. The Admiral said nothing. There were no words fit for what stood before him, only silence and respect. Later, as dawn broke over the water, Ghost returned home. His arm was bandaged, his eyes hollow but calm. His daughter ran to him once more, her laughter chasing away the night. She didn't ask about the scars or the blood. She only said, "You came back." He smiled softly. "I promised, didn't I?" She nodded and hugged him tight. Outside, the world moved on. Ships sailed, birds cried over the surf, the city awoke. But somewhere deep in the quiet of that small home, Iron Ghost finally laid his burden down. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat by the window and watched the sunrise. The light caught the edge of the photo on his wall. His old team, frozen in time, all of them smiling before the years had changed them. He touched the glass once, whispering words no one else could hear. Then he looked out again, toward the horizon. The sea was calm. For the first time in a long time, so was he. The legend of Iron Ghost would fade again. Not in secrecy, but in peace. Not as a myth, but as a man who had finally kept his last promise. And somewhere, in the whisper of the wind across the waves, it almost sounded like the world itself was saluting him goodbye.